Hi class, this is Dr. Dinka with a lecture on this week's reading on Going Global from Introduction to Global Studies. I wanted to provide some key points about neoliberalism, and what I did, I included some additional information in this lecture that we don't have in the article studied, but I thought it was important so that you understand those concepts. Now, um, in this PowerPoint, this additional information, I put it in parentheses and it's in italic font if you want to review the PowerPoint later on, so that it's easier for you to differentiate between what's in the article and what's additional material. All right, so let's get started. What is neoliberalism? It's actually a policy model that seeks to transfer the control of economic factors from the public sector to the private sector, and many neoliberalism policies enhance the workings of free market capitalism. So it is a capitalistic enterprise, an attempt to place limits on government spending, government regulation, and public ownership. Now, neoliberalism is often associated with the leadership of Margaret Thatcher. She was the Prime Minister of the UK from 1979 to 1990, and also she was the leader of the Conservative Party there in UK, and also it's associated with Ronald Reagan in the United States. Neoliberalism is actually related to a laissez-faire economics, which is a school of thought that prescribes sort of a minimal amount of government interference into the economic issues of individuals and society. Laissez-faire economics proposes that continued economic growth will lead to technological innovation, expansion of the free market, and limited state interference. And it also claims that private enterprises are best suited to serving the public, not the government. Now, neoliberalism, it's kind of an extreme of capitalism, and the opposite of that would be communism. So, for example, under communism, the economic power is in theory supposed to be controlled by the state, which in turn is controlled by the people. There is no private enterprise, and ownership of property and the means of productivity are transferred to the state, which means individual property rights must be curtailed. I included here a picture of Cuba. Now, of course, communism comes with its own issues, and we're not going to talk about it right now. That's for a different lecture. But I wanted to show you that in Cuba, actually, you see a lot of cars, kind of like from the 1950s, 1960s, from the United States, because when the government controls everything, they don't always have the means to produce everything that that society needs, and combined with the embargo, it led to them having mostly like vintage cars. Now, Cuba and other countries, they do have a lot more government involvement into some of their different aspects of society. For example, they have free healthcare and free education, but that's not limited to communist countries. Some capitalistic countries also have free or, for example, government-funded healthcare. I included here a map where you can see some of these countries that, for example, have government-funded single-payer fee free, and they include Canada to the north of us, Brazil, some European countries, Spain, Australia, New Zealand. Now, they do have, in some instances, higher taxes, and that's how they're able to provide these services. Other countries, they do have a mix of public and private health insurance. Also, some countries, because they have the government, like I said, they have a lot more involvement into the policies and the economics of the country. They provide free college tuition. And you have a list here. A lot of them are European countries such as France. You have Spain, Germany, Sweden, and also in Latin America, in Brazil. So a lot of, for example, students who want to study in the European Union, they can do that in other countries. For example, in France, it's the free classes are available not only to French people, but to European Union citizens as well. Coming back to neoliberalism, what are some of its main features? Number one, it's privatization of public resources. For example, prisons, charter schools, water, medical care, and the corresponding withdrawal of resources, in England's case, austerity measures from public services. A second one, it's a deregulated market, the suspension of regulations and crafting of legislation and policies that benefit private industry. For example, subprime mortgage crisis. And in the United States, we do have actually the FDA that kind of like regulates some of the aspects of private enterprises. Globalization, and we talked about it last class, that from its early beginnings, capitalism from the early modern period, the 1400s, when Christopher Columbus and other explorers came to the American continent, has always been global. And actually, neoliberalism accelerates the pace of that globalization by advancing a race to the bottom for the cheapest labor pools and the cheapest resources as well. But this in turn creates wealth inequalities. And you have this picture of a shanty town in Baseco Tondo, the Philippines, where you have an impoverished area, and behind it this skyscrapers. Now, kind of a similar situation happens in Brazil, and you have a picture here taken by Tuca Vieira, an image of a favela, a poor neighborhood next to a rich neighborhood in Sao Paulo, literally separated by a fence. And when asked about this photo, Vieira actually said it is clearly an illustration of social inequality, maybe the biggest problem for Brazil and Latin America. The unjust and brutal difference between rich and poor, inherited from slavery, is in the origin of many other problems: violence, below par schooling, prejudice, and many other issues. Inequality means that someone who is poorer is obliged to work more, so they have no time to study, which impacts on their education. As a result, they are not able to develop the critical and political awareness necessary to transform their own situation. Add to this the absence of any sense of collective responsibility or solidarity among the privileged in Brazil, and you have a closed circle that is very difficult to break. And this is from a quote from the Guardian newspaper. Now, coming back to a little bit of the history about the neoliberalism, and it started, a lot of these policies started with Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, where the United States and 28 allied nations met in Washington to sign a pact reached at Bretton Woods Conference that were seeking in a way to find a solution to the economic problems that they claim in a way led to World War II, and especially that happens in between the wars, also in the United States with the Great Depression as well. So what they did was they adopted this Keynesian economic model, which was the establishment of rules regulating international economic activities. So this Bretton Woods system created a controlled form of capitalism that lasted until the early 1970s. Now, in 1971, in an effort to kind of counteract forces that were undermining the economic competitiveness of the United States, President Nixon abandoned the gold standard and allowed the dollar to fluctuate in value. Until that time, for many years, for centuries actually, the currency of the United States was in precious metals, in gold and silver. I have here a $1 coin. This is from a peace dollar. This is from 1922. And when this gold standard was abandoned, then we started seeing some issues with the economy. So in the 1970s, we have global instability, including inflation, low levels of economic growth, high unemployment, and energy crisis. Also, with Bretton Woods Conference, we have the emergence of some agencies, for example, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and later on the World Trade Organization, and I'll talk about these in a little bit and what the role was. But before, I just wanted to show you this picture of 1973, when we have an oil embargo imposed by some of the countries that were controlling the oil at that time. And in recent news, there has been talks that because of the tense situation in Europe with Russia that controls a lot of oil, we might see a rise in prices of gas if the situation escalates. Now, the International Monetary Fund, established in 1944, World Bank also in 1944, and the World Trade Organization in 1995. These three economic institutions, most commonly associated with economic globalizations, they emerged or evolved from the Bretton Woods system. And the IMF and the World Bank provided loans for developing countries, but by the 1970s, they started adopting a neoliberal agenda and they started integrating and deregulating markets around the globe. By the 1980s, they began implementing structural adjustment programs, SAPs, in developing countries. And in order to obtain a loan or restructure existing one, countries would have to reduce the amount of money they spend on public services, including subsidies for basic food items, healthcare, and education. Countries would also be required to promote foreign investment, privatize state enterprises, devalue their currencies, promote export-led economic growth, and deregulate their economies. And this resulted in poverty in a lot of these developing countries. We have here a situation that happened in Chile in 1973, and still going on in Brazil with the deforestation of the Brazilian Amazon. So additionally, these SAPs contributed to increases in pollution and the degradation of the environment in many countries due to the removal of environmental regulations and the unbridled extraction of natural resources for foreign markets. You can read more about this in an article from Financial Times. I put a link in the PowerPoint. And in many cases, SAPs not only failed to help develop debtor countries, but also increased the poverty of their people. This was quoted in Campbell and Aldrich. For example, the Venezuelan government deployed military personnel to the streets to repress the popular rebellion that began on February 27, 1989, as a result of these policies. And last, you have a map here from Bretton Woods to the neoliberal IMF structural adjustment programs. And you actually get to see in this map that a lot of these programs, so they had to decrease government spending and subsidies for public aid, food, transportation, housing, improve terms for foreign investment, and increase in environmental devastation and pollution. And if you look at this map, you clearly see that a lot of these countries are in Africa and Latin America and Central America as well. So a lot of these policies, the IMF, it ended up hurting citizens of these countries, according to the article that we read. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. I don't mind answering any questions that you might have. I don't mind meeting via Zoom and we can chat more. Hope you find this lecture useful, and good luck with the quiz that you have this weekend. And like I said, any questions, please let me know. Thank you.